In the heart of 1666 London, beneath the soot-stained rooftops and the shadow of plague whispers, a quiet apprentice boy stirs waxen secrets inside a candle shop on Pudding Lane. But when a single spark ignites the most devastating fire in the city's history, that boy once invisible to the world will be thrust into a night of terror, survival, and rebirth. This is not just the story of the Great Fire of London. This is the story of the one who saw it from the inside, what he chose to save when everything else was burning. You were only 12 when Master Finch first took you in. A stooped man with wax-stained fingers and a permanent frown. He ran his candle shop on Pudding Lane like it had always been there, hidden between the bakeress oven soot and the shouts of street vendors. You remembered the sign above the door, Finch and Flame. Candles for crown and commoner. The air inside always smelled of hot tallow, beeswax, and smoke, thick and oddly comforting, especially in winter. That morning, just like every other morning, began with the lighting of the shop's largest taper, a thick beeswax pillar placed at the front window. It was a tradition. He said it welcomed the daylight, even when the sun was lazy. You'd been with him 3 years now. 3 quiet, careful years. Your hands, once clumsy and soft, had grown nimble from pouring, twisting, dipping. You knew the rhythm of wax as it cooled, how it held scent, how to read its readiness like some people read tea leaves. A thin fog hung over London, heavy with the sour sweetness of coal and bread and fish. You stepped out briefly to fetch water from the pump to streets over, watching milk carts roll by, and chimney boys scurry like crows between jobs. "We've orders today," he muttered, as if nothing had happened. But your eyes lingered on the parchment. You'd seen it before, those wax seals marked with the symbol of the city council. 3 dozen taper candles for St. Bride's. Whispers about the Queen wearing mourning colors for a reason no one dared name. To altar sets. The apothecary wants more lavender oil dripped in his O. Blasted his. The long ones. His face was pale, pinched. He didn't notice you at first. London was loud, filthy, and alive. But the candle shop was timeless, unchanging. The baker next door, old Thomas Farriner, was shouting against something about flour shipment delays. But you never spoke much. Master Finch didn't care for talking. And perhaps that's why he tolerated you. That and your gift for quietness. It was a Saturday. September 1st, 1666. You were up before the bell tower rang, but when you returned, Finch wasn't at his usual post by the cooling racks. Instead, he sat slumped near the back, reading a folded parchment. "Master," you said. He blinked, tucked the parchment away, and rose stiffly. A burst of orange light lit the sky above Farriner's roof. At first, it looked almost beautiful, like sunset had returned unexpectedly. You nodded and moved to the wax barrel. Whispers were everywhere these days. You and Finch stared for half a second, both frozen. Whispers of plague's return, whispers of war across the sea. But here, among the waxen wicks, you were safe. Until that night. You heard the commotion just after dusk. Then the hammering of feet on cobblestone as someone ran down the alley screaming about fire in the bakery. It started with a shout, then a second. You looked at Finch, expecting him to dismiss it. But he didn't. He was already moving, grabbing the long pole with the metal hook he kept for high candles, snatching the pail from beside the door. "Stay here," he barked. But you didn't listen. You followed him into the street, into a wave of neighbors running the other way. But then came the smell. It wasn't just smoke. It was burning bread, fabric, oil, wood, old wood, dry from a summer drought. The bakery's upper floor was alight. Embers snapped through the air like angry bees. Someone screamed as a shutter collapsed from above. Then, "Water," he shouted. "The pump." You ran with him. The line was already long. People jostling, shouting, throwing half-full pails toward Flame, while others tried to douse their own rooftops. Your heart thundered in your chest. You'd never seen Finch afraid before, but he was now. "Help me," he yelled, dragging a neighbor toward the shop next to yours, Miss Croydon's lace store. Fire was licking its eaves already. You turned, ready to run for more water, and then you saw it. Your candle shop? The flame had leapt to its roof. You watched in silence as the smoke turned black and the wooden frame began to groan. One tiny spark, carried by wind or fate, had found its home in the dried thatch Finch refused to replace last spring.
Oh, no, 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 no.
Finch's voice cracked, but there was no saving it. The wax, the oils, the stored talouette fed the fire like meat to wolves. You wanted to run to it, to save something, anything? The ledger. The blue taper you dipped just yesterday, your little knife? But Finch pulled you back. Too late, he muttered. Too late, boy. He didn't cry, didn't speak again, just stood there watching his life vanish into flame. By midnight, the street was unrecognizable. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang not in worship, but alarm. London's skyline flickered red. You sat beside Finch near the docks, watching more families carry bundles, carts, and screaming children. You reached into your coat, feeling the warm wax of one candle you had somehow tucked away earlier. It was nothing, just a stub. But it was something, Finch noticed. For a second, his eyes softened. You did good, boy, he murmured. And for the first time in years, he placed a hand on your shoulder. The fire wasn't over. London would burn for 3 more days. But this was the beginning. The moment where a boy, once just a shadow in a candle shop, began to see that sometimes, when everything is reduced to ashes, something else begins. Something unexpected, something new. You awoke to the smell of smoke. At first you thought it was the usual stink of tallow and wax. The air above the candle shop always carried the oily breath of fire, the lingering ghost of melting fat. But this smell was different, acrid, thick, choking. You sat up in your straw-filled mattress, blinking into the darkness. It wasn't even dawn yet. You shuffled to the window, your feet numb from the cold stone floor. The panes were fogged, but when you rubbed them clear, you saw it. A glow, orange and pulsing, rising behind the butcher's alley. Not candlelight, not lanterns, something else. Master Wren? You called, your voice hoarse. No answer. You rushed down the narrow steps, careful to avoid the creaking one near the middle. The ground floor of the shop, usually cluttered with wax slabs, old molds and soot-darkened tools, was empty. But the door was open, and outside the world had changed. You stepped into the street barefoot. The wind hit your face, warm and restless. And then you saw it clearly. The house at the far end of the lane, Baker Farron's old place, was on fire. Not just flickering, roaring. Flames bloomed from the windows like angry roses. You ran with it to the line forming near the well tin, men long, already shouting, already covered in soot. Smoke bled up the brick walls and tangled in the black sky. The wooden roof had already collapsed, and the upper windows popped and burst in quick, violent flashes. People ran, half-dressed, dragging trunks and children and dogs. Someone screamed for water. Someone else clutched a crucifix, sobbing. The church bells began to toll, wild, uneven, panicked. Get the horse loose. You stood frozen until a voice yanked you from the moment. You pulled your pocket knife and cut the main loop. The horse shrieked and stumbled back, kicking out. You ducked just in time. Boy, help with the pails. The merchant, his face gray with terror, whipped the horse mercilessly, trying to turn it around. But the street was too narrow. Flames had reached the shutters across from you. The fabrics caught like paper. The horse bucked. The cart tilted. The screams. It was Cooper Giles, the barrel maker, red-faced and sweating as he handed you a half-filled bucket. But the fire was moving faster than the buckets could travel. That's when you saw the horse, a black stallion, pulling a merchant's cart full of bolts of fabric. You moved without thinking. Dashing through the smoke, you reached the merchant and grabbed the reins, your hands burning with heat. Unhitch him, you shouted, coughing hard. The fire had reached your shop now. The walls were blistering. The roof groaned. The wax inside would only feed the flames. He fumbled at the straps, cursing, as the leather was too tight, already smoking. You reached the steps just as part of the ceiling collapsed behind her. The force knocked her forward into your arms. The merchant grabbed the horse's mane and stumbled into the alley with it, leaving the flaming cart behind. You followed, coughing. Your lungs scraped raw. Behind you, the cart exploded. The blast knocked you both against a wall, and fire rolled down the street like a living beast. Tiles cracked. Windows shattered. The sky bled orange and black. And that's when you saw it. Through the chaos and smoke, a shape, a girl, standing in the doorway of the candle shop. Your sister. You had forgotten she was there. You ran. Your legs barely worked, your breath slicing like ice through your chest. "Anna," you screamed. She turned toward you, pale, stunned. Her nightdress glowed in the orange light. "Come," you shouted. But she didn't move. You pushed through the heat, your skin screaming. Sparks fell like burning snow. You grabbed her hand and pulled her down the street. Behind you, the candle shop died in a tower of smoke. The heat followed you like a wolf. You found shelter in the churchyard, with dozens of others' families wrapped in cloaks, cradling what few belongings they'd managed to carry. A dog howled. Somewhere, a woman wept into a loaf of bread. Your sister sat beside you, shivering, with the Dutch, the baker's cat. The fire still raged in the distance, lighting the whole sky. Ash drifted down like snowflakes. Someone whispered that half the city was already gone. Others blamed the Catholics, but you knew the truth. It had started with a candle. It's a single, careless moment. And now, everything was changing. The sun rose, but it brought no warmth. A pale, ghostly light hung over the city, dulled by the smoke that choked the sky. Ash drifted like snow through the morning air, clinging to every rooftop, coat, and child's hair. From the hill behind St. Magnus Church, you could see the city burning. But the bells had stopped helping. There was no containing the fire now. London was a sea of embers. The wind carried the sound of timber groaning, walls collapsing, and somewhere in the distance, the haunting clang of warning bells. It moved like it had thoughts, a hunger. You sat beside Anna on a scorched patch of grass near the river, wrapped in a cloak someone had thrown over you during the night. You didn't know who it belonged to. No one cared. Nothing belonged to anyone anymore. Anna didn't speak. Her hands were wrapped tight around the scorched remains of your father's old pocket watch. It didn't tick anymore. Hayden T told her, yet that master Renor candle shop owner, and your teacher never made it out. You didn't have to. She already knew. Boats crowded the Thames. The river had become the last escape for thousands. Merchants, milkmaids, chimney sweeps, noble ladies, butchers, thieves. Sailors all jammed together in a drifting human tide. Boats, ferries, rafts, ferries ripped from homes. Lashed together with rope, anything that could float was seized and pushed onto the current. You and Anna joined the queue leading toward a dock near Southern. The ferryman waved his hand. 2 more, then we go. A boy no older than you shouted, 3 shillings to cross. For if you bring livestock, you had no livestock. You barely had a coin. Still you pressed forward, keeping Anna close. She clung to your coat as people surged around you mothers, holding babies wrapped in curtains. Old men dragging trunks through the mud, a priest clutching a burning Bible. At the edge of the dock, a large barge waited, ready packed with people. You pushed through, shouted, begged. Someone shoved you back. Another tried to grab Anna's arm. That's when the blacksmith appeared. His beard was singed, his leather apron was half burned, but his voice was still like thunder. "These 2 are with me," he barked, pulling you and Anna forward with hands like iron. No one argued. You didn't know his name? But he shoved a few coins into the ferryman's hand and climbed aboard after you. The boat groaned as it pushed into the water. You turned, and the last thing you saw of your street was a chimney crumbling like a grave marker. On the river, the Thames, once full of trade and song, was now a stream of silence. Boats drifted like ghosts. Some were overloaded and sank mid-crossing, others spun in circles, their captains screaming. The smoke reached the riverbank in thick gray sheets, and the heat made the air shimmer like a fever dream. You sat with Anna between crates of flour and a terrified goat. Across from you, a woman with no shoes held a silver hairbrush in her lap, like it was her only child. A man coughed into his sleeve, his face pale. You noticed he had black marks on his neck. You looked away. The blacksmith sat beside you, his arms crossed. "What street?" he asked, finally. "Pudding Lane." He grunted. "Baker's boy, are you?" "No," you said quietly. "Gandal apprentice." His eyes flickered. "Wren's shop," you nodded. He looked out at the burning skyline, then gave a heavy sigh. My forge was near Milk Street. Lost it all last night. You said nothing. Everyone had lost something. Some had lost everything. Anna broke the silence. Where are we going? The blacksmith glanced down. South. Anywhere the wind doesn't blow fire. Was it wrong? The wind was the worst part. It carried the blaze across rooftops like a plague. One moment you were safe, the next embers rained from the sky like red snow. You reached the southern shore. But safety was a lie. Dozens had already arrived before you. Families huddled beneath trees. Bread was being sold at triple the cost. Men with knives eyed the desperate. You saw a child trade her shoes for a jug of water. The blacksmith looked at you both. Find shelter. Stay off the roads at night. And he turned and walked into the crowd without another word. You never saw him again. That night you found an abandoned stable outside town. Anna curled beneath a sackcloth, and you wrapped your coat around her. She was shivering, but not from cold. That night the dreams came. Flames licking your feet, smoke in your lungs, screams that never ended. You woke choking. It wasn't a dream this time. Sky to the north glowed again, red and pulsing. The fire had crossed the river in the night. No one was safe. You shook Anna awake. We move again, you whispered. She didn't ask where. She didn't cry. She just took your hand. The Thames, once full of trade and song, was now a stream of silence. Boats drifted like ghosts. Some were overloaded and sank mid-crossing. Others spun in circles, their captains screaming. The smoke reached the riverbank in thick gray sheets, and the heat made the air shimmer like a fever dream. You sat with Anna between crates of flour and a terrified goat. Across from you, a woman with no shoes held a silver hairbrush in her lap, like it was her only child. A man coughed into his sleeve, his face pale. You noticed he had black marks on his neck. You looked away. The blacksmith sat beside you, his arms crossed. What street? He asked, finally. Pudding Lane. He grunted. Baker's boy, are you? No, you said quietly. Gandal apprentice. His eyes flickered. Wren's shop, you nodded. He looked out at the burning skyline, then gave a heavy sigh. My forge was near Milk Street. Lost it all last night. You said nothing. Everyone had lost something. Some had lost everything. Anna broke the silence. Where are we going? The blacksmith glanced down. South. Anywhere the wind doesn't blow fire. Was it wrong? The wind was the worst part. It carried the blaze across rooftops like a plague. One moment you were safe, the next embers rained from the sky like red snow. You reached the southern shore. But safety was a lie. Dozens had already arrived before you. Families huddled beneath trees. Bread was being sold at triple the cost. Men with knives eyed the desperate. You saw a child trade her shoes for a jug of water. The blacksmith looked at you both. Find shelter. Stay off the roads at night. And he turned and walked into the crowd without another word. You never saw him again. That night you found an abandoned stable outside town. Anna curled beneath a sackcloth, and you wrapped your coat around her. She was shivering, but not from cold. That night the dreams came. Flames licking your feet, smoke in your lungs, screams that never ended. You woke choking. It wasn't a dream this time. Sky to the north glowed again, red and pulsing. The fire had crossed the river in the night. No one was safe. You shook Anna awake. We move again, you whispered. She didn't ask where. She didn't cry. She just took your hand. Every door left ajar invites a whisper. Some whispers remember. The carriage jolted to a stop as the last stretch of road turned from gravel to cracked earth. Trees stood on either side like guardians, their limbs bare, reaching across the path like gnarled fingers. The sky, a dull iron gray, hung heavy over the countryside as Thomas and Anna stepped out. They had traveled for 2 days with their new caretaker, stern-faced woman named Mara, who claimed she owed their mother a favor. She had found them on the edge of the village as the plague bells began to ring again. Without waiting for thanks, she took them in and brought them to a manor long lost in both time and memory. It wasn't on any map. Anna squeezed Thomas's hand as they stood before the crumbling gates. Beyond, a house stretched wide and brooding across the hill. Its windows shuttered like eyes too tired to watch. Ivy had crawled over the stone, pulling at the frame like nature itself wanted it buried. "Welcome to Hollamere," Mara said. Her voice lacked warmth, but her grip on Anna's shoulder was steady. Thomas didn't ask how she knew their mother. He didn't ask why she chose to help. Too many questions had already died unanswered in the days since the fever took their father and the coughing claimed their home. Questions felt useless, now shadows thrown against thicker darkness. Inside the manor, dust hung in the air like ash. The grand staircase was lined with portraits whose faces had long since faded, their eyes obscured by years of neglect or perhaps shame. Candles flickered against the stone, though no one had lit them. "Choose a room upstairs," Mara said, disappearing behind a heavy door. "You'll hear things at night. I pay them no mind." That first evening passed in uneasy silence. The rooms upstairs were strange, more like a scene paused in time than a place to rest. In one room, a music box still played softly when opened, the melody broken but familiar. In another, dried flowers were strewn across the bed, as if someone had been preparing for a funeral. Anna chose the smallest room. It had a narrow window facing the woods and a single wooden chair. Thomas took the room at the end of the hall. His fireplace had long gone cold, but the stone above the mantel bore carving symbols he couldn't recognize. Circles within circles, lines intersecting as if capturing a star on parchment. That night they did not sleep. Scratching, it started from the walls. At first, soft, like mice, but then louder clawing sounds, like someone dragging nails across stone from within. Thomas stood in his doorway, the candle in his hand trembling. Down the hall, Anna stood too, her eyes wide. She had heard it too. "Just the wind," Thomas said, though no wind could make the walls moan. The next day, they explored. Mira had left early, without saying where she was going. She often disappeared like that, for supplies, she claimed. But there were no villages nearby, and she never returned with food. Anna found a library sealed behind an iron latch. Thomas pried it open with an old poker. Inside, hundreds of books lay scattered like bodies across the floor. Some were written in Latin, others had no language at all, only illustrations, drawings of strange devices in human bodies with open chests and labeled lungs. In one corner of the room stood a tall wardrobe, covered with a black cloth. Thomas stepped toward it. "Don't," Anna whispered. But curiosity had already taken root. He pulled back the cloth. Right, it wasn't a wardrobe. It was a cabinet tall, with glass doors. Inside were plague masks, 5 of them, each with a hooked beak and dark eye holes of the doctors who walked the streets during the Black Death. But these were different. They were painted. Symbols adorned the mask's red markings across the beaks, runes around the eye holes. And behind them, slips of parchment. Names, dates, all from 20 years ago. "These aren't from now," Thomas said, voice hollow. "They're from before," Anna whispered. The last time the Black Death came, when entire villages vanished and birds stopped singing. Before memory became story, before fear became history. That evening, Mara returned. "You found the library," she said without surprise. "You've seen the masks?" Thomas looked at her, trying to make sense of the lines in her face. Gosh. She looked neither young nor old, but worn, like parchment soaked too long in ink. "This place was a hospice once," she said. "During the first plague, the doctor who lived here tried methods." "What kind of methods?" Anna asked. "The kind that left more ghosts than graves." Mara didn't explain more. But that night, the scratching returned down. This time it came with whispers. Not words, just sounds. Breaths on the edge of hearing. A rhythm that echoed through the halls like someone pacing, always pacing. Thomas tried to sleep. He dreamt of a man in black robes, standing at the foot of his bed. The man held no lantern, but shadows danced around him like moths to a flame. He lifted a mask, the same beaked mask from the cabinet stand, placed it on Thomas's chest. When Thomas woke, the imprint of something cold remained. The following morning, Anna found the cellar. It was hidden behind the pantry, covered by old sacks of flour and dried herbs. The stairs were slick with damp and led to a stone chamber that smelled of rot and iron. On the far wall, a mural stretched from floor to ceiling. It showed a village burning, houses aflame, people weeping. And in the center, a figure in black holding a staff with a snake coiled around it. Beneath him, a phrase etched in Latin. Quicurat et perit, Wyatt. He who heals also perishes. "Why keep this here?" Anna asked. Because the past doesn't stay buried, Mara said behind them, her voice softer than usual. This house remembers. Thomas stared at the mural, his fingers tracing the painted flames. He felt something pull at him deeper than fear. A connection, as if he had seen this fire before. Mara watched them carefully. Not all who died here were buried, she said. Some remained, and some refused to go. That night the whispers became words. They spoke of pain, of betrayal, promises broken. Anna heard her own name spoken from the floorboards. Thomas heard the voice of his mother, weeping behind the wall. And from the room with the fireplace, a glow emerged, faint like embers refusing to die. Thomas entered, and the symbols above the mantle flickered faint gold. Something was awakening. What if the plague never left? What if it waits? Patient, silent, buried beneath the bones of those who tried to cure it. Just before dawn, Thomas finds a hidden compartment behind the fireplace in the old hospice. Inside, a centuries-old leather-bound ledger filled with names, dates, and causes of death, but some names haven't yet died. Some entries are marked in advance, and one of them is his. As the echo of footsteps begins again louder, closer, Thomas and Anna must decipher the truth before the house makes good on a prophecy written in blood. The hidden chapter, calm historical story, the fire had long since burned out. Thomas sat in the quiet of the hospice's study, wrapped in an old wool blanket, the candlelight flickering against the cracked walls. Anna was asleep on the cot beside the window, her breathing soft and even. The silence should have been comforting, but something in it pressed against his chest, like the building itself was holding its breath. He turned back to the journal in his lap. Dr. Aldous Vernum, 1348. A plague doctor, one of the earliest assigned to this region. The ledger had been hidden inside a compartment behind the hearth, sealed away beneath soot and broken mortar. At first, it read like any old physician's log. Names, dates, symptoms. But as the pages turned, the ink grew erratic, the writing more urgent. The last 5 pages weren't medical notes. They were warnings. The fever has learned. They die before symptoms. She told me to burn the map. I can't leave. It knows. What could that mean? He flipped back to the beginning. Most of the names were familiar villagers from the region whose tombstones now crumbled behind the hospice in overgrown soil, but a few stood out. One halfway down a page marked March 1348, chilled him more than the cold air sneaking in from the chimney. Thomas Bellamy scheduled, he read it again. His name, first and last, but the date beside it hadn't passed. It was 3 days from now. He slammed the book shut. Earlier that night, it had been Anna who'd found the loose stone behind the hearth while searching for firewood. She'd called him over, curious about the gap behind the bricks. What they pulled out was the ledger wrapped in thick waxed cloth, sealed with a long crumbled stamp. Doctor's notes? She'd asked. Looks that way, Thomas had replied, though he already felt the unease prickling the back of his neck. The moment he'd touched it, the room had felt colder. There had also been something else in the cavity, a small pouch of dried herbs, a brittle feather quill, and a rusted key. That key now lay on the desk beside him, its iron loop cold against his fingers. It matched nothing they'd seen in the hospice. Yet, now the wind outside rose again, brushing snow against the windows. Thomas tried to focus. He had to know more. The entries continued. I buried the ledger because they wouldn't believe me, because they couldn't. The voices started when I stopped wearing the mask. She walks the halls still. I saw her in the mirror. This place must never be reopened. The mask. That plague doctor mask, long and hooked like a raven's beak, still hung on the wall above the stairwell. He and Anna had laughed nervously at it on their first night, joking that it was just decoration. But the ledger seemed to speak of it as if it held power, or protection. The mask listens. A floorboard creaked overhead, loudly. Just enough to remind him they were not alone in the hospice. He turned to glance at Anna, still sleeping. A deep breath. He stood. The locked door there had always been a locked door at the end of the east corridor. Thomas had tried it once before, but it wouldn't budge. Now, with the rusted key in hand, he crept past the creaking stairs and pushed the key into the iron slot. It clicked. The air behind the door was thick and dry dust trapped in centuries. His candle barely lit the room, but it was clearly a study of sorts, tall bookshelves most empty. A map of the region pinned crookedly to the wall, claw marks through its center. And in the far corner, a chair facing the window. Something lay in the chair. He hesitated, then stepped forward. It was only a cloak, and beneath it, a wooden mannequin, like a training figure or sewing dummy, but one dressed in full plague doctor attire. The black cloak, the gloves, the hat, and yes, the long, curved mask. Except the glass eye of the mask was cracked. A small hole in the side, like something had once pushed out or in. Pinned to its chest was a final note in the same shaky hand as the journal. Whoever finds this, leave while you can. If your name is in the book, it's already begun. A whisper he spun, voice faint. From the corridor, Tom stumbled back through the door, locking it behind him. His candle danced in the draft, now curling through the corridor like breath. He didn't call out. Something told him not to. When he returned to the study, Anna was awake. She sat up groggily, rubbing her eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked. He handed her the book, open to the page. She read it in silence. "That's your name," she finally said. "But that doesn't make sense. Why would your name be in a 14th century ledger?" "I don't know," he whispered. "I think this place has been waiting for me." The map. The next morning, they studied the map torn on the study wall. Behind it, they discovered a second layer, a hidden drawing etched into the plaster. A circle, drawn in ink, with symbols neither of them recognized. But one point was clearly marked. Beneath the hospice, a cellar. Anna traced it with her finger. Maybe this is where the doctor tried to contain something, or hide it. Thomas swallowed. "I think it's where we'll find answers." The storm didn't announce itself with thunder. There was no downpour, no roaring winds. Only a quiet change, a stillness in the air so complete that even the birds stopped calling. The sky faded from blue to a dusty pewter, as if the world had suddenly forgotten color. Thomas stood by the hospice window, watching the clouds gather like old coats on a rack. Thick, heavy, waiting. Anna joined him, the faded doctor's ledger still clutched in her arms. She'd read every page, now some of them twice. There were still no explanations. Only fragments, symbols, warnings, and that same circle drawn again and again. One thing was becoming clear. This place hadn't been a refuge. It had been a lock. The stone cellar door. It took most of the morning to find the entrance. Hidden beneath broken floorboards in the farthest storeroom, sealed under layers of dirt and time, a thick iron ring sat embedded in the stone slab, its edges crusted with age. When Thomas pulled, the slab groaned like something exhaling after centuries of stillness. A breath from the past. Below, stairs. Dust fell in lazy spirals as the beam of his lantern traced the path downward. The air grew colder with each step, not just in temperature, but in feeling, like stepping through memory. "Are you sure?" Anna asked behind him. "No," he said honestly, "but I think this is where the story leads." She nodded and followed. The vault below the cellar wasn't what they expected. No damp walls or stored wine, no cobwebs or forgotten crates. It was clean. Not in a modern sense, but in that unnaturally preserved way. As if time had touched every part of the building except here. The floor was tiled in black stone, smooth, too smooth for its supposed age. In the center of the room stood a small pedestal, and on it, a mask. The mask. The plague doctor's beaked face gleamed faintly in the lantern light. Its eye sockets were empty, its beak slightly parted. A slip of paper rested beneath it. Anna picked it up and read aloud. "I took it off, and the voices stopped. But now I hear them in the dark instead. To where it is to forget. To see clearly is to suffer." Aldous Vernum. They stared at the mask in silence. Thomas stepped forward. "It's been down here for centuries, untouched." Anna frowned. "Then whose is the one hanging upstairs?" "The mirror room. They found it that evening. Another hidden door. This one behind a rotted armoire, barely noticeable. The keyhole matched the rusted key they'd used earlier, though it took 2 turns this time to open. Inside, the air was staler, heavier. It was a long, narrow chamber lined with mirrors, old and spotted. Their silvering fading in strange patterns. At first glance, nothing moved. But as they stepped inside, Thomas caught it. A reflection. Not Anna's. Someone else standing in the far corner. He turned. Nothing but in the mirror it remained. The shape wore a long coat, a curved mask, no face. The candle flickered violently, and the reflection stepped forward, even though nothing had moved in the real room. Anna gasped. "Get out," she whispered. They backed away slowly. Mirrors creaked on their hinges as they passed, groaning like old bones. When they finally shut the door, they didn't speak for a long time. Thomas looked at her, his face pale. "I think the mask wasn't meant to hide from disease," he said. She swallowed. "What then?" He looked back toward the sealed chamber. To hide from it. The sound beneath the floor that night, they didn't sleep. The wind had returned, no longer soft and whispering, but calling. The hospice groaned and creaked, its bones shifting as if it remembered something it didn't want to. And then at midnight, they heard it, tapping, soft, measured, beneath the floorboards, a rhythm. For slow knocks paused, then again. Anna sat up straight. That's under the study. They lit lanterns, crossed the hallway, opened the door. The study was still, except for the ledger, which now lay open on the table. Though neither of them had touched it, the page had changed. New ink. Fresh. One line the doctor never left. The voice in the mirror. Before dawn, Thomas stood in front of the mirror at the end of the main hall, one of the few that hadn't cracked. He stared at himself. Then slowly the image began to shift. His face faded, and in its place, the doctor, not a man, exactly, not a ghost, but a presence. A whisper in his ear that wasn't a sound, but a feeling. "The sky turned gray when I looked too long. You'll do the same. Because it remembers your name." He stumbled back. Anna grabbed his arm. "What did you see?" He shook his head. "Nothing." But the mirror behind him now had a crack that hadn't been there moments before. And in the corner of the glass, something watched. When the morning finally broke, the light that poured through the hospice windows felt different. Warmer. Not in temperature, but in tone-like light that had traveled a great distance through a story no one had finished telling. The frost had melted, as the gray mist had lifted. And outside, the garden was blooming again. Anna stood barefoot in the doorway, her shawl clutched tight. She didn't speak, didn't move. Just stared at the courtyard where only days before, weeds had strangled the soil and ash had clung to every branch. Now, green vines crept up the stone. Lavender danced in the breeze. A single apple, red and perfect, hung from a tree that should have been dead. Thomas joined her, still shaken by the night. "This can't be real, it's not," Anna said quietly, "but it's here." They wandered into the courtyard as the sun climbed above the broken tower. Neither said it, but both felt it. The air had changed. Tension had lifted. At the garden's edge stood a small gate, once covered in ivy and now clear. Beyond it, an orchard, or what remained of one. Tangled rows of apple trees twisted toward the sky, their limbs knotted with age. But the earth was soft underfoot, fragrant. There was life here now, though faint, like a heartbeat slowly returning. Near the center stood an old wooden table, half sunk in the ground. Anna knelt beside it, brushing away dirt. Beneath the soil, engraved into the surface, was a name, Aldous Vernum, and below it in Latin, quod, absconditum, est, redibit. What is hidden will return. She looked up at Thomas. "He was buried here, or he buried something here," Thomas murmured. He began clearing more earth. And then, under the edge of the table, they found it. A trapdoor. The second ledger, the cellar beneath the orchard, was not made of stone, but packed earth. Low beams curved over their heads like the ribs of a shipwreck. At the center, in a cradle of roots and dirt, sat a book. Bound in dark leather, its cover cracked, its pages weathered but intact. Thomas opened it carefully. It wasn't a medical ledger. It was a confession. Aldous Vernum had written it near the end of his life. After the plague had passed, after the masks were burned, after the last of the villagers left, he'd stayed behind, alone. The pages revealed things neither Thomas nor Anna had expected. That the disease hadn't come from ships or rats, but from something older. That the mask had been designed not to protect the body, but to seal the mind. That those who wore it for too long, began to hear things. see things, and that Aldous had done something terrible to contain it. I buried them, one entry read. All of them had no choice. Anna turned pale. He didn't mean bodies, did he? Thomas shook his head. No, he meant memories. The name beneath the tree, as they emerged from the orchard cellar, the wind shifted. Leaves fell in a sudden gust, and one of them landed flat against Anna's chest. She looked down. It wasn't a leaf, it was paper. Old, yellowed, a fragment torn from the confession. One sentence on it, scrawled in trembling ink: "It only grows where memory is watered with silence." They turned back to the tree. Its bark shimmered slightly in the sun, as though something inside it was watching, waiting. Anna reached out, touched the trunk. And then just for a moment the garden shifted. The colors brightened. The birds grew silent. The shadows behind the walls deepened. And in the stillness, they both heard it. A whisper. A single word. Return. The map of sleep that night, Thomas couldn't rest. The book from the cellar sat on the table between them. Its final page was blank except for a single ink blot. But when Anna tilted it toward the candlelight, she noticed something hidden. Lines. Barely visible. A map, drawn in the thinnest ink, faded to near invisibility. It didn't map the village, nor the hospice, nor the orchard. It mapped memory, moments, symbols, names, and at the center, beneath layers of circles and runes, was the symbol they'd seen in every room, every page. The eye. And a word scrawled beneath it. Dormeyer. The blooming garden's warning by morning. The garden was in full bloom. Flowers of every color, vines twining through every window, bees buzzing, birds singing, as if the world had healed overnight. But Thomas and Anna no longer felt wonder. They felt watched. Because now they knew. The garden wasn't revival. It was cover. A mask. The same way the mask had hidden something within the doctor. The garden now hid something beneath the soil. Anna closed the book and looked at Thomas. "You didn't bring it back," she said. He met her eyes. He was waiting. They say that in old villages, mirrors were once covered after someone died. Not just out of respect, but out of fear. Fear that the reflection might hold on to something. Or someone. That morning, Thomas found the hospice mirrors had uncovered themselves. The cloths were all on the floor. Every mirror was fogged. Not from condensation, but from breath, except they had been alone all night. The empty reflection in the hospice's east hallway stood a tall, arched mirror. It had once belonged to the abbess of the convent before the hospice was ever built. Rumor had it the glass had been imported from Venice so pure that it reflected more than light. When Thomas passed by it that morning, he paused. He could see the hallway behind him, could see the candlelight. He could see Anna standing a few steps behind him, but he could not see himself. He stepped forward, leaned in. Still nothing. Just empty hallway behind empty space. "Anna," he said quietly. When she joined him, her eyes widened. "You're not there?" "I know." The return of the mask panicked. They returned to the old medical office where they had first found the mask. It was gone. Glass case stood empty. But on the desk sat something else. Folded piece of paper, freshly inked, still damp at the edges. Neither of them had left it there. Anna opened it with trembling fingers. A sketch of a man wearing the mask, standing in the garden beneath the apple tree. No face was visible, no signature, but scribbled in the corner were the words, "The garden remembers." The stranger in the window. That night, Anna saw him first. She had been in the upper attic gathering candles when the temperature dropped, her breath fogged, the flame flickered. And then, she saw a man standing just outside the window, 3 stories below, still unmoving, head tilted slightly to the side, like he was studying the house. She couldn't see his face, only the silhouette of a long coat, and a glint of glass where his eyes should be. By the time she called Thomas and they looked again, he was gone. But on the window pane, left in the frost, were 2 fingerprints. Beneath them, a third, smaller, as if from a child. The memory mirror determined to find answers, they returned to the orchard cellar. Thomas carried the book, Anna carried the map. At the center of the cellar, where the roots hung low and the air always smelled like damp soil, Thomas had an idea. Hold the map under the mirror." He pulled the arched mirror, heavy and dust-covered, down from the hallway and brought it into the cellar. When Anna placed the map beneath it, the lines shifted. The mirror's reflection, the ink glowed faintly. The path redrew itself, and it led not to the hospice, but beneath it, to the chapel ruins. Thomas whispered. Anna nodded. Where they buried the forgotten? The chapel below by candlelight. They descended the crypt stairs behind the hospice. The chapel was no longer used. Its bell tower had collapsed years ago, and most villagers avoided it. They said the ground had never settled, that the dead never stayed put. But that night, the space was still. Too still. The altar had crumbled. But behind it, where the bricks had caved, a tunnel had formed. Not dug by hands, but by roots. Thick and knotted, as if the garden itself had grown downward. Thomas and Anna followed it, and at the end, they found a door, made of wood and glass, with a mirror embedded in the center. A mirror, with no reflection. They didn't open the door, because from behind it, they heard breathing, slow, measured, and something scratching against the wood. Thomas leaned closer. The breathing stopped. A voice whispered from the other side. "Why did you forget me?" It wasn't male. It wasn't female. It sounded like both, and neither. A voice worn like a mask. Anna pulled Thomas back, but not before the door cracked. Just slightly. Enough for something to slip through. The ink on the walls, by the time they returned to the hospice, something had changed. The walls were covered in writing, not in paint, not in blood, but in ink, the same black ink from the journal. Lines, symbols, names, repeating over and over. They left me. They wore me. They became me. Return, return. Anna's hands trembled. It's the mask. Thomas nodded. Or what's inside it? The night of no shadows. The final scene that night was stranger than anything before. In the hospice hall, with every candle lit, they stood in silence and noticed something impossible. They had no shadows, not cast by the candles, not even faint outlines. Only their reflections in the mirror remained, and when they moved, the reflections didn't follow. The hospice walls had always watched in silence. Old stone, old wood, old memories. But on that night, the walls seemed to breathe, to listen, to wait, and it was the eye, the symbol drawn over and over in the old journal, that finally began to make sense. Because beneath it, something ancient had opened its gaze. The symbol revealed. Anna and Thomas sat in the West Hall, the only room untouched by the spreading ink. Around them, the rest of the hospice had become a labyrinth of scribbled walls and broken reflections. Anna rolled the journal open again, pointing to the repeated symbol, the eye. But this time, Thomas noticed something different. It's not just an eye. He turned the page sideways. The shape curved in a way that mirrored the old garden's layout. The orchard paths, the well, the chapel. It was a map, and at its center, a perfect circle. The fountain, Anna whispered. The one long dried up. The one sealed with iron bars. The one no one had approached in years. The forgotten fountain, the moonlight spilled across the courtyard as they approached it. Vines had grown thick around the iron grate, and the stone was cracked with time. But beneath it, something shimmered faintly. Not water. Glass. A mirror. Thomas knelt, brushing away moss. This was never a fountain. It was a seal, Anna realized. They found the key in the chapel's altar, tucked in the same hollow behind the fallen bricks where the root tunnel had ended. As the lock gave way, the bars groaned. A low sound followed, not wind, but breath, rising. The descent beneath the fountain was a spiral staircase of stone, damp, worn. Every step they took echoed like it hadn't been touched in 100 years. The further they went, the colder it became, not with the chill of earth, but the cold of memory. At the bottom, the chamber opened wide. Candles lined the walls, unlit. But the mirror at the center of the floor, perfectly round, rimmed in iron, glowed faintly with silver light. And above it, carved into the ceiling, was the eye. The mask returns, lying in the center of the mirror. The mask waited, but this time, it wasn't the same. It had changed. Its eyes were open, and the inside shimmered with movement like ink suspended in oil. Thomas stepped closer, but Anna grabbed his arm. Don't touch it. He nodded. I think it wants us to see. Together, they looked down, not into their reflections, but into a scene, a memory. The memory below, they saw a man in plague robes. He stood in the same garden, but it was vibrant, full of blossoms and songbirds. Children ran past him, laughing. The hospice behind him was whole and bright, but as he walked, the people avoided him, not because of disease, but because of fear. He had chosen to wear the mask, and slowly it began to wear him. In each reflection, his face faded more, till only the mask remained. As the vision faded, a whisper filled the chamber. You see me now? Thomas stepped back. Who are you? I am what you leave behind. The voice was soft, genderless, ancient. Every face forgotten, every name erased, every soul discarded when the sickness passed. You were a man once, Anna said. No, I was many. And now, I am none. The garden's secret, as they stood frozen, the chamber began to shift. Roots crept from the walls. Ink bled through the stones. The hospice was bleeding into this place. The garden remembers, the voice echoed. You tried to bury it, but memory roots deeper than stone. Anna reached for the journal. She opened the final page, the one they had never dared touch. And there it was. The last drawing. A child holding the mask, crying, saying goodbye to someone. Behind glass. The truth of the mask. The mask, they realized, had never been evil. It had been a vessel. For grief, for memory. For every forgotten healer, mother, child, and mourner, lost to the plague and erased by history. Wearing it was not possession, was a burden. Every person who wore it, like Thomas, like the man in the vision, was giving voice to those who no longer had one. The final choice. As the roots drew close, the mask began to hum. It needed a new keeper. But Anna reached into her coat and pulled out something small. Her own ribbon. From the garden tree. She tied it around the mask and whispered, You're remembered now. The roots stopped, the ink faded, the mask dimmed, and for the first time, the mirrors showed their reflections. The next morning, the hospice was quiet. No whispers in the walls, no ink on the floors, no eyes in the mirrors. Just light, soft, golden, filtering through the old windows, as if it had been waiting 100 years to return. Anna stood at the edge of the garden. The air smelled like rosemary and damp soil. Birds fluttered between branches, and where the vines once strangled the fountain's iron grate, fresh green shoots now reached toward the sun. Thomas stepped out from the chapel behind her, journal in hand, had written through the night. Not just what they had seen, but what they had remembered. What the mask had made them remember. The last entry, he placed the journal on the chapel altar. Its last page was no longer a drawing. It was a name. One of the hundreds they had found buried beneath the hospice, etched into hidden walls, pressed into dry leaves, carved into forgotten corners. But this one, they spoke aloud, Sybil. No surname, no birth date, just that one word. It echoed, and then the hospice sighed. Not like before. Not a haunted breath or ancient groan, but relief, release. Like it had finally been heard. Letting go. Anna took the mask, still wrapped in the ribbon, and walked to the old garden tree. The same one from her childhood. The same one that had survived every storm. She tied the ribbon to its lowest branch and hung the mask gently beneath it, letting it sway in the breeze. The garden didn't react, simply accepted it, as if the memory had finally come home. The letter that started it all. Thomas unfolded the letter Anna had received, the one that brought her back. There was no name on it, it's just a seal, the same I. But inside, now that they looked again, there was another page folded into the seam. One they hadn't noticed before. A message written in careful, uneven hand. When the earth forgets, the garden remembers. Come home, not to stay, but to see. Anna traced the signature. She didn't know who S truly was. Spirit? A ghost? Or just someone who had loved too deeply to be forgotten? But it didn't matter, because now, they would never be. A new keeper weeks later, the hospice was no longer empty. The council had agreed to restore it, not as a hospital, but a museum, memory house. Anna and Thomas stayed long enough to archive the journals, to clean the walls, to plant new herbs in the garden beds. And when tourists began to visit, they never noticed the ribbon on the tree, or the mask swaying quietly in the leaves. But the locals knew. Some things weren't meant to be explained, only remembered. The final words on their last evening there, Anna walked the garden alone. The air was still, the sun low. And just as she turned to go back inside, she saw it. A child, maybe 6 or 7, standing by the tree, staring up at the mask. Her face was unfamiliar, her clothes modern, but her eyes, they held centuries. "Do you remember them?" the girl asked. Anna nodded. "I do now," the girl smiled, and vanished behind the tree. The garden slept again, but this time, not in sorrow. In peace, in memory, in light, because history isn't what we bury. It's what we choose to carry.